The crack of the gavel felt like a physical blow, but Elara Vance didn't flinch. In the sterile, merciless theater of the Manhattan family court, she was the lead actress in a tragedy, and her only line was silence. Her ex-husband, the charismatic private equity shark, Julian Croft, smirked as the judge read the verdict, stripping her of everything. The whispers in the gallery painted her as a fool, a woman so broken she couldn't even speak for herself. But what they saw as weakness was a calculated, devastating strategy. They didn't know her silence was a shield protecting a secret so monumental, it was about to shatter the world of everyone who had wronged her. Because 5 days later, a single press release would turn those whispers into stunned gasps. The silent, defeated ex-wife was about to be introduced to the world by a different name, the sole heiress to the billion-dollar Blackwood fortune. This is the story of how a woman's quietest moment became her loudest victory. The courtroom was a symphony of quiet cruelties. The squeak of a lawyer's leather shoe on the polished floor, the rustle of papers that detailed the dismemberment of a life, the almost inaudible sigh from the judge. For Elara Vance, however, the loudest sound was the confident, rhythmic tap of her ex-husband's Mont Blanc pen against his pristine legal pad. Tap, 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 a metronome counting down the final seconds of her old life. Julian Croft sat across from her, a portrait of effortless victory. His suit, a custom Tom Ford creation, probably cost more than the alimony he was so vehemently fighting against. Beside him, his lawyer, Marcus Thorne, a man with a predator's smile, shuffled his documents with the smug air of a chess master who had his opponent in checkmate in 3 moves. "Ms. Vance," Judge Albright said, her voice edged with a weary impatience that had been building all morning. "The court has asked you a direct question. Mr. Croft's counsel has presented evidence suggesting you willfully mismanaged marital assets, leading to the failure of your art gallery. Do you have any response to these allegations?" Elara looked up. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, met the judge's for a fleeting moment. She saw not malice but frustration. Here was a woman who just wanted to clear her docket to move on to the next broken family. Elara's gaze then drifted to Julian. He leaned forward slightly, a glint of anticipation in his eyes. He wanted her to fight. He wanted her to cry, to scream, to deny it all with the frantic, messy passion he had always despised in her. He wanted a show. She gave him nothing. Her own lawyer, a kind but overwhelmed public defender named David Brown, nudged her gently under the table. "Elara, please," he whispered, his voice a strained plea. "Say something. Anything. Tell them about the accounts he locked you out of. Tell them how he diverted the funds." Elara's hands remained perfectly still in her lap. She had given David the full story, but with one critical instruction: he was to present the facts clinically, but she would not testify. She would not be cross-examined. She would not engage. David thought it was a strategy born of trauma, a psychological retreat. He couldn't have been more wrong. It was the most aggressive, calculated move of her life. Marcus Thorne rose to his feet, his voice booming with practiced theatricality. "Your Honor, the defendant's silence speaks volumes. It is the silence of culpability. For 2 years, my client, Mr. Croft, poured his hard-earned money into what he believed was his wife's dream. A dream that turned into a financial nightmare due to her, let's call it, artistic temperament when it came to finances. He is not asking for retribution. He is simply asking for a clean break, and for the court to recognize that he should not be penalized further by paying alimony to the very person responsible for such significant financial loss." It was a masterful twisting of the truth. The gallery had been Julian's idea, a vanity project for his arty wife that he could show off to his friends. He'd underfunded it from the start, and then when he'd met his younger, more malleable new girlfriend, Tiffany, he'd systematically siphoned money from the gallery's business accounts into his own private holdings, starving it of cash flow and creating the very failure he was now pinning on Elara. He hadn't just broken her heart. He had tried to break her spirit, to rewrite history so that she was not just the discarded wife, but the incompetent one. Ms. Vance, the judge repeated, her tone hardening, this is your final opportunity to address the court regarding the claim for alimony and the division of remaining assets. Your silence will be taken as acquiescence. Elara felt the weight of every eye in the room. The pitying stares from strangers, the triumphant sneer from Julian, the worried glance from David. This was the moment of her public humiliation. She had walked into this marriage with a promising career as a historical art curator and a small but significant inheritance from her grandmother. She was leaving with nothing but a suitcase of clothes and a mountain of debt Julian had cleverly engineered to be in her name. The court was about to formalize it. She took a slow, deliberate breath. She looked directly at Julian, holding his gaze. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. He was expecting tears, a tremor of the lip. He saw only a serene, unnerving stillness. She gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head to her lawyer. David Brown slumped in his chair, defeated. My client has no statement, Your Honor. The gavel fell. In light of the evidence presented and the defendant's refusal to contest the claims, Judge Albright declared, the court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Croft. The request for spousal support is denied. All outstanding business debts associated with the Vance Gallery are assigned to Ms. Vance. The marital apartment and its contents are awarded to Mr. Croft. This marriage is hereby dissolved. The sound echoed, finalizing her erasure. Julian Croft subtly pumped his fist under the table. Marcus Thorne clapped him on the shoulder. Elara stood up, her movements measured and calm. As she turned to walk out of the courtroom, she could hear Tiffany, who had been sitting in the back row, whisper excitedly to a friend, He's free. It's finally over. We can go to Aspen next week. Elara didn't look back. She walked past the rows of benches, her back straight, her head held high. She felt the sting of their judgment like 1,000 tiny needles, but beneath it a cold, hard certainty was beginning to form. They thought they had witnessed an ending. They had no idea they had just witnessed the beginning. She walked out into the hazy New York afternoon, a woman with nothing to her name. And for the first time in years she felt utterly, completely, and dangerously free. 2 years earlier, Elara had left Julian. It wasn't a dramatic plate-smashing affair. It was a quiet departure on a Tuesday morning while he was in a board meeting. She had packed a single bag, leaving behind the sprawling Soho loft that had become a gilded cage, its minimalist white walls a constant screaming reminder of the color that had been bleached from her own life. The first few months were a blur of temp jobs and cheap coffee. She worked as a barista, a dog walker, a freelance fact-checker for a dry academic journal. The humiliation was a constant companion, but it was sharper, more honest than the veiled condescension she had endured in her marriage. Julian had loved the idea of her, the brilliant, cultured art historian who looked good on his arm at fundraisers. He had systematically dismantled the reality of her, criticizing her research, mocking her passion projects, and slowly convincing her that her ambitions were childish fantasies. It was during this period, while working at a small, perpetually rain-streaked cafe in the West Village called The Daily Grind, that she met Alistair. He wasn't Alistair then. He was just Mr. Ash, an elderly man, who came in every afternoon at precisely 3:00 p.m. He was tall and stooped, with a shock of untamed white hair and eyes that were a startlingly bright blue. He dressed in worn, comfortable corduroys and tweed jackets that smelled faintly of old books and Earl Grey tea. He always ordered the same thing, black coffee, 1 sugar, and a seat by the window where he would read thick, leather-bound books and stare out at the bustling street. Most of the staff ignored him, seeing him as just another piece of the cafe's furniture. But Elara, with her curator's eye for detail, noticed things. The quality of his worn leather shoes. The quiet authority with which he held himself even when lost in thought. The way he treated everyone, from the busboy to the manager, with the same level of gentle, unassuming respect. Their friendship began with a book. He was reading a first edition of Homer's Odyssey in the original Greek. A difficult voyage home, Elara had said quietly as she refilled his coffee. He looked up, his bright eyes focusing on her for the first time. A slow smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Indeed," he replied, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "But the monsters are often less fearsome than the memories one is sailing away from." From that day on they spoke. Their conversations were never about the mundane. They talked about the use of lapis lazuli in Renaissance paintings, the disputed authorship of Shakespeare's later plays, the quiet genius of Emily Dickinson, the fall of Constantinople. In Mr. Ashe, Ilara found an intellectual peer, a mind as curious and as hungry as her own. He never asked about her past, about why a woman who could debate the merits of Caravaggio's chiaroscuro was wiping down sticky tables for a living. He simply accepted her as she was in that moment. He listened. When she spoke about art, the passion she thought Julian had extinguished would flare back to life. She described the feeling of standing before a Rothko, the sublime, terrifying pull of its colors. She talked about the secret history of objects, the stories embedded in a hand-carved chair or a piece of Roman glass. "You don't just see things, Ilara," he told her one afternoon, his gaze thoughtful. "You understand their soul." It was a profound validation, a single sentence that began to heal cracks within her she thought were permanent. He shared pieces of himself too, but always in oblique, allegorical ways. He spoke of building a business empire as if it were a grand, intricate tapestry, full of brilliant threads and dark, ugly knots. He lamented the loneliness of the view from the top of a mountain, the way the air grew thin, and the world below became abstract and distant. He spoke of a family lost to ambition, and time of regrets that had settled deep in his bones. One day, as a cold autumn rain lashed against the cafe window, he seemed particularly melancholic. "Tell me, Ilara," he said, stirring his coffee, though it had no sugar to dissolve, "if you were given a great power and immense capacity to shape the world, what would you do with it?" Ilara thought for a moment, wiping a stray drop of water from the table. "I don't think I'd try to shape the world," she answered honestly. "It's too big, too stubborn. I think I'd try to protect the small, beautiful things that the world tries to crush. A young artist's talent, a forgotten piece of history, a quiet place for people to think. I suppose I'd build a sanctuary, not an empire." Mr. Ashe looked at her for a long time, his blue eyes searching her face. Then he nodded slowly. "A sanctuary," he repeated softly. "Yes, I think you would." Not long after, Mr. Ashe stopped coming to the cafe. The 3:00 p.m. lull felt empty, the chair by the window achingly vacant. Ilara inquired at nearby hospitals and community centers, but no one had heard of a Mr. Ashe. He had vanished as quietly as he had appeared, leaving her with a renewed sense of her own worth and a deep, puzzling sense of loss. She had no idea that their quiet intellectual friendship in a dingy cafe was the single most important relationship of her life. She didn't know that Mr. Ashe, the lonely old man with the kind eyes, was Alistair Blackwood, the legendary reclusive titan of industry, a man so private that there were fewer than a dozen known photographs of him in existence. And she certainly didn't know that in his final months battling a silent illness, he had found in her the one thing his billions could never buy: a genuine human connection, untainted by greed or expectation. He had been testing her, observing her, and she had passed a test she never even knew she was taking. The 5 days following the divorce were a descent into a gray, featureless limbo. Ilara moved into a small 6th-floor walk-up apartment in a less-than-fashionable part of Brooklyn, the kind of place where the hiss of the radiator was the only constant companion. The court's judgment was a tangible weight, a legal declaration of her worthlessness. Julian had made sure of it. He'd texted her once the day after the verdict. "Hope you enjoy your new life. Don't come crawling back when you can't pay your bills. Jay." She deleted it without replying. She spent her days sending out resumes for any position related to art or history, no matter how menial. The replies were sparse and discouraging. The failure of her gallery, now a matter of public record thanks to the divorce proceedings, was a black mark against her name. In the art world, where reputation was everything, she was radioactive. On the fifth day, a crisp Friday morning, a letter arrived. It wasn't shoved in her mailbox with the usual junk mail and bills. It was delivered by a courier, a stern-looking man in a sharp uniform who required her signature. The envelope was thick, made of heavy cream-colored cardstock. The return address was embossed in elegant, severe lettering. Sterling and Finch, LLP, Sterling Tower, 57th Street, Manhattan. Alara's heart seized. Sterling and Finch. She knew the name. Everyone knew the name. They weren't just lawyers. They were kingmakers and dynasty builders, the firm that handled the estates of the world's wealthiest and most powerful families. She immediately assumed it was a mistake, or worse, that Julian, in some final act of cruelty, had sicked his own high-powered legal team on her for some imagined slight or outstanding debt he'd manufactured. With trembling hands, she slid open the envelope. The letter inside was brief and formal. Dear Ms. Vance, this letter is to request your presence at our offices on Monday, September 22nd at 10:00 a.m. The meeting concerns a matter of utmost importance regarding the estate of a recently deceased client. Your prompt attendance is essential. Please ask for Eleanor Sterling upon your arrival. Sincerely, Eleanor Sterling, Senior Partner, Sterling and Finch, LLP. The estate of a deceased client. She racked her brain trying to think of any distant relative or acquaintance who would be represented by such a firm. There was no one. The Vances were a modest family of academics. Her mother was gone, her father estranged. It had to be a mistake. She spent the weekend in a state of anxious confusion. She Googled Eleanor Sterling and found a picture of a formidable woman in her late 60s, with silver hair cut in a severe bob and an expression that suggested she did not suffer fools gladly. She was legendary in the world of estate law, known for her discretion and her iron will. On Monday morning, Alara stood before Sterling Tower, a gleaming black skyscraper that seemed to pierce the clouds. It was a monument to power and wealth a world away from her crumbling walk-up. Dressed in the only decent blazer she owned, she felt like an imposter. The lobby was a cavern of marble and polished steel populated by people who moved with an effortless, expensive confidence. Taking a deep breath, she approached the reception desk. "I'm here to see Eleanor Sterling," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "My name is Alara Vance." The receptionist, a cool blonde who looked more like a model than an office worker, checked her screen. Her perfectly plucked eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "Of course, Ms. Vance. Ms. Sterling is expecting you. 82nd floor." The elevator ride was a silent, stomach-churning ascent. When the doors opened, she stepped into a reception area that was more like a modern art museum. A massive Joan Mitchell painting hung on one wall, its vibrant chaos a stark contrast to the serene, minimalist decor. A moment later, a door opened and Eleanor Sterling herself appeared. She was even more imposing in person. She wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, and her eyes, sharp and intelligent, seemed to assess Alara in a single sweeping glance. "Ms. Vance, thank you for coming," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. She didn't offer to shake hands. "Please come in." Alara followed her into a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking, godlike view of Central Park. The entire city sprawled beneath them. On the large mahogany desk, there was only a single thick, leather-bound document. "Please have a seat," Ms. Sterling said, gesturing to one of the two chairs facing her desk. "Can I offer you some water, coffee?" "Water would be fine, thank you," Alara managed to say, her throat dry. As an assistant silently brought in a glass of water, Ms. Sterling sat down and placed her hands on the document. She fixed her gaze on Alara, her expression unreadable. "Ms. Vance," she began, getting straight to the point. "I was the personal attorney for a man named Alistair Blackwood. I don't know if you are familiar with the name." Alara shook her head. "No, I don't believe so." The name was vaguely familiar, perhaps from a business journal Julian used to leave lying around, but it meant nothing to her personally. "Mr. Blackwood was an intensely private man," Ms. Sterling continued. He passed away 2 weeks ago after a long illness. He had no living relatives. For the last 40 years I have been the sole executor of his estate and his will." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the silent room. Alara felt a growing sense of surreal dislocation. What could this possibly have to do with her? Mr. Blackwood's will was unconventional, Ms. Sterling said, her tone clinical. "He spent the last year of his life finalizing its terms. It is my duty to inform you of its contents." She opened the leather-bound folder. The document is extensive, detailing the disposition of various assets, trusts, and philanthropic foundations. But the primary clause is quite simple. Eleanor Sterling looked up from the page, and for the first time a flicker of something curiosity-wonder crossed her stoic features. It reads, "To Alara Vance, a woman of kindness and integrity, who saw a man and not a fortune, I hereby bequeath my entire remaining estate without condition or qualification. She was a sanctuary in my final days, and it is my wish that she now has the means to build her own." The room tilted. Alara gripped the arms of her chair to steady herself. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion. Alara Vance. Entire estate sanctuary. It made no sense. There must be a mistake," she stammered. "I don't know anyone named Alistair Blackwood." Ms. Sterling reached into a drawer and pulled out a simple framed photograph. She slid it across the desk. Alara looked down, and all the air left her lungs. It was him. Younger, yes, with dark hair and a confident smile, standing on the deck of a sailboat. But the eyes were unmistakable. The bright, intelligent, piercingly blue eyes. It was Mr. Ashe. The silence in the office was absolute, broken only by the frantic pounding of Alara's own heart. She stared at the photograph, her mind struggling to connect the two identities, the kind, unassuming Mr. Ashe from the cafe, and the mysterious, powerful Alistair Blackwood, whose name was now irrevocably linked to hers. "Mr. Ashe," she whispered the name, feeling foreign and inadequate on her tongue. A pseudonym he adopted in his later years. Eleanor Sterling confirmed, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. He grew weary of the sycophants and fortune hunters. He wanted to spend his final months experiencing the world without the distorting filter of his wealth. He found your cafe. He found you. Alara felt a wave of dizziness. Every conversation, every debate about art and philosophy replayed in her mind, now cast in a blinding new light. His talk of empires and lonely mountains, his question about what she would do with great power. It hadn't been idle chatter. It had been an interview, a final profound test. His entire estate. She asked, the words feeling absurd. What does that even mean? Ms. Sterling took a deep breath, as if preparing to launch a ship. It means, Ms. Vance, that as of the legal certification of his death last week, you are one of the wealthiest individuals in the world. The Blackwood estate is a diversified portfolio of assets valued after all taxes and obligations at approximately $9.7 billion. The number was so vast, so astronomical, that it didn't register as a real sum of money. It was a concept, an abstraction. Billion. With a B. It includes... Ms. Sterling continued, turning a page in the will. A controlling interest in Blackwood, consolidated a global logistics and technology firm, a real estate portfolio that includes this building, a 10,000-acre estate in upstate New York, a villa on Lake Como, a townhouse in Belgravia, London, and a private island in the Caribbean, a private art collection considered to be one of the finest in the world, with works by Monet de Kooning and a previously unknown Vermeer, and a liquid capital fund of over $2 billion. Alara felt like she was drowning. She shook her head, trying to clear it. But why me? We just talked. We had coffee. It seems those conversations were more meaningful to Mr. Blackwood than you can imagine, Ms. Sterling said. She then pulled a smaller sealed envelope from the folder. He also left this for you. A personal letter. He instructed that you read it before any documents were signed. Her hands shaking, Alara took the envelope. It was the same heavy, cream-colored paper. Her name was written on the front in a strong, elegant, slightly shaky hand. She broke the seal. My dearest Alara, if you are reading this, then my voyage has finally ended. I apologize for the deception of my name, but I hope you will understand. In my life, I built an empire of things of steel and code and concrete. But in my final year, I found myself impoverished in the ways that truly matter. I was surrounded by people who wanted something from me who saw only a vault to be opened. Then I met you. You, who were in the midst of your own quiet storm, offered me the simple, priceless gift of your time and your thoughts. You never asked for anything. You didn't even know there was anything to ask for. You spoke to me of beauty, of history, of the soul of things. In your presence, I was not Alistair Blackwood, the magnate. I was just Ash, a man listening to a brilliant woman. You told me you would build a sanctuary. I believe you. This fortune has been a gilded cage for me for too long. In your hands, I hope it will become a key, a tool to protect the beautiful things you spoke of, to foster the talent the world overlooks, and to build a life of your own choosing free from the shadows of your past. Do not let its weight crush you. Let it be the wind in your sails. Thank you, my dear friend, for the coffee and for the kindness. Yours, Alistair. Tears streamed down Alara's face, hot and silent. They weren't tears of joy for the money, but tears of grief for the friend she now realized she had lost, and of overwhelming gratitude for his staggering, incomprehensible faith in her. He had seen her when she felt invisible. He had valued her when the world and her own husband had declared her valueless. She finally understood her silence in the courtroom. It was a subconscious act of preservation, an instinct she hadn't fully understood at the time. If she had fought Julian, if she had argued over the scraps he was leaving her, her financial situation would have been a matter of intense legal scrutiny. If word of a potential inheritance had leaked, Julian and his lawyers would have descended like vultures trying to delay the divorce to lay claim to her future. Her silence had been a clean amputation. She had let him win the battle, severing their legal and financial ties completely, just days before the war was won by a force he couldn't have possibly imagined. She looked up at Eleanor Sterling, her eyes clear now despite the tears. A new resolve was hardening within her. The timid, broken woman who had walked into the courtroom was gone. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice steady and clear. A slow, genuine smile finally broke through Eleanor Sterling's professional facade. "First," she said, pushing a pen across the desk, "you sign here, Ms. Vance, and then we get to work." The announcement was not a headline. It was an earthquake. Sterling and Finch LLP, a firm known for its monastic silence, issued a terse 2-paragraph press release. It was a masterclass in understated bombshells. It announced the passing of their client, the reclusive Alistair Blackwood, and the execution of his final will and testament, which named one Ms. Alara Vance as his sole unconditional heir. The financial world went into a frenzy. Who was Alara Vance? The name was unknown. Journalists scrambled, digging into public records. Within hours they found it, a recent divorce filing in the Manhattan family court, Vance versus Croft. The details were salacious and until now utterly insignificant. A failed art gallery owner, a humiliating legal defeat, a woman stripped of her assets and denied alimony just over a week ago. The narrative flipped with dizzying speed. Forbes, the silent heiress. How a down-and-out divorcee inherited the Blackwood billions. The Wall Street Journal. Blackwood's surprise successor. Vance inheritance sends shockwaves through Consolidated. Vanity Fair. The ultimate revenge. Julian Croft divorced his wife, days before she became a billionaire. Julian Croft was in a celebratory dinner with Tiffany at Per Se when his phone began to vibrate off the table. He ignored the first few calls, annoyed at the interruption. But then his phone, Tiffany's phone and the phones at the surrounding tables all began to light up. A low murmur swept through the restaurant. "Julian," Marcus Thorne's voice said, panicked and breathless when he finally answered. "Have you seen the news?" "I'm at dinner, Marcus." "What is it?" Julian snapped. "It's Alara. You need to turn on the TV or look at your phone. Now." Julian opened a news app. The first thing he saw was a picture of Alara. A candid shot of her leaving the courthouse, her expression serene and unreadable. Next to it was an old file photo of a man he vaguely recognized as the mythical Alistair Blackwood. The headlines swam before his eyes. He dropped his phone. It clattered onto his plate, scattering microgreens and truffle foam. "What is it, sweetie?" Tiffany asked, annoyed. "You've gone pale." Julian couldn't speak. The numbers, the headlines, the sheer impossibility of it all crashed down on him. $9.7 billion. He thought back to the courtroom, her silence, her infuriating placid calm. It hadn't been defeat. It had been control. She had known. She had to have known. She had sat there and let him publicly humiliate her, let him take everything, knowing she had a billion-dollar kingdom waiting for her. He hadn't won. He had been played. He had been made a cosmic world historical fool. A strangled sound escaped his lips, a mixture of a laugh and a sob. He began to shake, then erupted in a furious tire chew-in. "No! No! It's not possible! She's nothing! She's a failed artist!" The entire restaurant was now staring. Tiffany, mortified, tried to quiet him. "Julian, stop! You're making a scene!" But Julian was beyond reason. He shoved his chair back, nearly knocking a waiter over, and stormed out of the restaurant, his mind a raging inferno of greed, fury, and utter soul-crushing regret. His first call to Alara went to a disconnected number. She had already changed it. He then called her old lawyer, David Brown. "What can I do for you, Mr. Croft?" David asked, a newfound confidence in his voice. "This inheritance, it's marital property. We were married when she met this man. I'm entitled to half of it," Julian screamed into the phone. David Brown laughed, a quiet, satisfied chuckle. "I don't think you understand how this works, Julian. First, the inheritance was legally conferred after the dissolution of your marriage was finalized by a judge's gavel. The timing is, as they say, impeccable. Second, inheritance is almost universally considered separate, not marital property. You don't have a leg to stand on. You made sure the break was clean. Well, now it is. Have a nice life." The line went dead. The fallout was swift and brutal. The board of Julian's private equity firm, spooked by the public humiliation and the sudden instability of their star partner, called an emergency meeting. Whispers started that Blackwood Consolidated, now under new unpredictable ownership, might pull its massive pension funds from their management. Julian was suddenly toxic. Tiffany, seeing her future of Aspen trips and designer handbags evaporate, and seeing the man she thought was a winner revealed as a colossal loser, packed her bags. She left a short, cold note on the marble countertop of the apartment he had won in the divorce. Julian was left alone in the vast, empty loft, a place that now felt like a monument to his own stupidity. He had fought tooth and nail for this apartment, for the paintings on the wall, for the last dregs of their shared assets. He had gloated over winning a few $1 million worth of property from Alara, and in doing so he had forfeited his claim to billions. It was a miscalculation of such epic proportions that it would haunt him for the rest of his days. While Julian's world imploded, Alara's was expanding at an exponential rate. The first week was a whirlwind of meetings in the 82nd floor office at Sterling Tower, which she now learned was referred to as the Keep. Bedfordshire. She was introduced to a small, fiercely loyal team that had managed Alistair's empire for decades. A silver-haired CFO who could explain quantum financial derivatives with the patience of a kindergarten teacher, a sharp-witted head of operations, and Eleanor Sterling, who was her constant guide, her Virgil in this new glittering inferno of wealth. They didn't treat her like an ignorant interloper. They treated her like a queen whose coronation had been long awaited. They explained that Alistair had been preparing them for this, telling them his successor would be unconventional, but would have a moral clarity the company desperately needed. The transformation began on the inside. The fear and self-doubt that Julian had so carefully cultivated in her for years began to wither under the light of this new responsibility. She found that the skills she had honed as a curator, a sharp eye for detail, deep research abilities, an understanding of long-term value over short-term trends, and the ability to see the story behind the object were directly applicable to running an empire. She wasn't a finance shark, but she understood value in a way Julian never could. The external transformation followed. Eleanor Sterling arranged for a private consultation with a stylist. Alara didn't want to become a caricature of a wealthy woman. She rejected the flashy brands and opted for understated, elegant pieces from designers like the Rowe and Brunello Cucinelli clothes that conveyed quiet confidence, not loud status. She cut her long hair into a chic, shoulder-length style that framed her face and highlighted the intelligence in her stormy eyes. When she looked in the mirror, she saw not Julian's discarded wife, but the woman Alistair Blackwood had seen all along. Her first major decision stunned the board of Blackwood Consolidated. One of the company's most profitable but controversial divisions was in private prisons. It was a legacy part of the business Alistair had regretted but had never untangled. In her first board meeting, Alara, with Eleanor at her side, announced her intention to divest completely from the division, redirecting the capital into a new foundation for arts and education. There were gasps. The CFO calmly presented figures showing the tens of millions in annual profit they would be sacrificing. There are some things whose value can't be measured in profit margins. Alara stated, her voice calm and firm. The Blackwood name will no longer be attached to the caging of human beings for profit. This is not negotiable. The board, faced with the unshakable resolve of their new 100% shareholder, had no choice but to comply. The news of the divestment made headlines again, this time casting Alara not as a lucky heiress but as a bold, ethical leader. One weekend, Eleanor drove her upstate to see the Blackwood estate named Graymore. It wasn't a gaudy mansion, but a sprawling, elegant stone house nestled among rolling hills and ancient trees overlooking a vast, shimmering lake. Inside it was a sanctuary of books and art. The legendary private collection was not displayed ostentatiously but hung and placed with a curator's love, as if the pieces were part of a conversation with each other. She walked through the halls, running her hand along the spines of thousand-year-old books in the library. She stood before the secret Vermeer, a small, luminous painting of a woman reading a letter by a window, and felt a profound connection to Alistair. He had bought these things not for status, but because he truly loved them. In a small study overlooking the lake, she found his desk exactly as he had left it. On it was a single worn copy of the Odyssey in Greek. Tucked inside was a pressed flower, a fading violet. Alara knew then that she was home. This wasn't a cage. It was the sanctuary she had spoken of in the cafe. It was now hers to protect and to share. She decided this would be the headquarters for her new foundation, a place where artists and scholars could come for residencies free from the financial pressures of the world, a place to foster the small, beautiful things. 3 months after the will was read, Julian Croft finally managed to secure a meeting. He had to go through 3 layers of lawyers, and the meeting was not granted at Alara's home or office, but in a neutral, sterile conference room at Sterling and Finch. The man who walked in was a ghost. His custom suits were gone, replaced by a slightly too large department store blazer. He had lost weight, and his trademark confident swagger was replaced by a twitchy, desperate energy. His private equity firm had forced him out. His friends had abandoned him, and he was drowning in legal fees from a half-dozen lawsuits filed by investors who had followed him into ruin. Alara sat at the head of the long table, flanked by Eleanor Sterling. She was the image of composure and power. She no longer looked like the woman he had divorced. She looked like the woman who owned the building they were in. "Alara," he began, his voice raspy. I wanted to talk to you. Alone." "Ms. Sterling stays," Alara said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "What do you want, Julian?" He began a rambling, pathetic plea. He spoke of their shared history of the good times, conveniently forgetting the years of emotional abuse. He tried to claim that his business acumen had inspired her, that he was indirectly responsible for her good fortune. Finally, he got to the point. "I'm ruined, Alara," he said, his voice cracking. "Everything is gone. I'm asking you. No, I'm begging you. For a settlement, a small percentage, 1%, just enough to start over, for old time's sake." Alara listened without expression. When he was finished, a long silence filled the room. Julian looked at her expectantly, a flicker of hope in his hollow eyes. He still believed on some fundamental level that she was the same soft-hearted woman he could easily manipulate. "No," Alara said. The single word was not spoken with anger or hatred. It was spoken with the finality of a chapter closing. It was a simple statement of fact. "But why," he stammered, "after everything we had—" Alara finally looked at him, truly looked at him. She felt no desire for revenge, no satisfaction in his downfall. All she felt was a profound, weary pity for this small, grasping man. "You know, for years you told me my biggest weakness was that I was too sentimental," she said, her voice even and calm. "You told me I lived in a fantasy world of art and history, and that I didn't understand how the real world worked, how value was created and taken." She leaned forward slightly. "But you were wrong. My weakness wasn't sentimentality. It was you. And your biggest weakness, Julian, is that you can only see the price of things but never their value. You saw our marriage as a transaction. You saw our divorce as a hostile takeover. You see this inheritance as a stock price you missed out on." She stood up, the meeting clearly over. "Alistair Blackwood didn't leave me his money. He left me his trust. He valued my character when you told me I had none. He valued my passion when you called it a hobby. The money is just a tool. It's the byproduct of a life lived with integrity, something you will never understand." She walked towards the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. "You asked for 1% for old time's sake," she said, looking back at him one last time. "But the final verdict in our divorce, the one you celebrated so much, declared that our old times were worth exactly nothing. The court has already decided what you are owed by me. And I am a woman who respects the letter of the law." She walked out of the room without a backward glance, leaving Julian Croft alone at the vast empty table, a billionaire in spirit, a beggar in reality, forever haunted by the fortune he threw away and the woman he never truly saw. Alara, meanwhile, stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, her future as wide and limitless as the sky above. The winter that followed was a season of quiet construction, not with brick and mortar, but with purpose. Alara chose to make the Graymore estate her home and the heart of her new operations. The vast book-lined library, once Alistair's solitary refuge, was now the nerve center of the newly established Blackwood Foundation. The world, having learned of her existence, now beat a path to her door. Sacks of mail arrived daily, request proposals and pleas from every corner of the globe. They were a testament to the raw, desperate hunger of the world, a scientist needing funding for climate research, a village in Peru seeking a clean water well, a musician who had lost her priceless cello in a fire. But mixed in with the genuine cries for help was the noise of opportunism. Letters from self-proclaimed inventors with perpetual motion machines, long-lost cousins with dubious genealogical charts, and investment gurus promising to double her fortune. Alara quickly learned that her greatest challenge was not the management of money but the stewardship of trust. Her past life had given her a painful but invaluable skill, the ability to discern the authentic from the performative. Julian's world had been built on the latter, and she had learned its language intimately. She sat by the grand fireplace one snowy afternoon, a stack of proposals on the antique table beside her, with Eleanor Sterling, who now served as the Foundation's chairwoman. "The capital appreciation on the tech portfolio is exceeding forecasts by 12%, Eleanor said, reviewing a spreadsheet on her tablet. "If we reinvest, we could add another $1 billion to the endowment within 3 years. Alara looked out the window, watching the heavy, silent snowflakes blanket the ancient oaks. Alistair didn't spend his last year finding an heir just so she could get richer, Eleanor. He wanted me to build sanctuaries. A noble goal, Eleanor conceded, her tone practical. But a sanctuary needs strong walls. The endowment provides that. I know, Alara said, turning back to her. But it's time to open the gates, even if just a little. I want to start the Blackwood Fellows program, here at Graymore. The idea was simple but radical. Each year they would select a small number of brilliant but struggling creators, artists, writers, composers, thinkers, and give them a year's residency at the estate. They would be housed in the beautifully renovated guest houses, given a private studio space, and most importantly, a generous stipend that would free them from all financial worry. The only condition was that there were no conditions. No required gallery show at the end, no demand for a finished manuscript, no expectation of a commercial product. The goal was to give them the one thing a creator needs most and is rarely afforded: absolute, untethered freedom. Eleanor, ever the pragmatist, raised an eyebrow. No deliverables. The board may call that inefficient. Let them, Alara replied with a small smile. Julian taught me everything I need to know about efficiency. It often leads to a beautifully organized life with no soul. This isn't an investment in a product, it's an investment in a person. The first Blackwood Fellow was a young painter from the Bronx named Sophia Reyes. Alara had discovered her work at a small, struggling gallery in Bushwick. Sophia's canvases were enormous, chaotic, and breathtakingly alive. She painted with a raw, visceral energy, depicting scenes of urban life with the emotional weight of classical history paintings. Alara saw in her a fire and a talent that the world was close to extinguishing. The gallery owner told her that Sophia worked 2 bartending jobs to afford her tiny studio and often had to choose between buying paint and buying food. Instead of sending a formal letter, Alara drove to the city and went to the address of the studio herself. It was a cramped cold-water loft above a tire shop. The smell of turpentine and linseed oil was overpowering. Sophia, a young woman with paint-smeared hands and wary, intelligent eyes, was openly suspicious when Alara introduced herself. "I know who you are," Sophia said, crossing her arms. She didn't seem impressed. "I read the papers. So what's this? The billionaire heiress is slumming it for a day. Want to buy a painting to make you feel good?" Alara didn't flinch at the cynicism. She recognized it as armor. "Actually," she said, her gaze drifting to a massive unfinished canvas depicting a crowded subway car, the faces a mixture of exhaustion and defiance. "I'm here because I believe a talent like yours deserves to be loud and the world is forcing you to whisper. I'm here to offer you a megaphone." She explained the fellowship. Sophia listened, her skeptical expression slowly melting into one of utter disbelief. "A year with a stipend, and I don't owe you anything at the end?" Sophia asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "What's the catch? Do I have to have dinner with your rich friends and perform like a trained monkey?" "No," Alara said softly. "There's no catch. The only thing I ask is that you honor your gift, that you work without fear for 1 year." "Why?" Sophia asked, the single word hanging in the air between them. "Why me?" Alara thought of Mr. Ashe, of their quiet conversations in the cafe. She thought of how he had given her a priceless gift without ever asking for anything in return. "Because a very wise man once gave me a sanctuary when I needed it most," Alara said. "He didn't ask me to pay him back. He asked me to build my own. This is me laying the first stone." A few weeks later, Sophia Reyes moved into a sun-drenched studio in a converted barn on the Graymore estate, with a view of the frozen lake. Alara watched her from the library window on her first day. She saw the young painter stand before a huge blank canvas, her entire body thrumming with a kind of nervous, joyful energy. For the first time in years, Sophia was not thinking about her rent, her bills, or her next shift. She was thinking only of the art. In that moment, watching a stranger's dream ignite, Alara felt a sense of profound, quiet satisfaction that no stock market gain or legal victory could ever provide. The billion-dollar fortune was not a prize she had won. It was a responsibility she had inherited, and her life's work, she now understood, was not to be the heiress to a vast fortune, but to be the architect of its soul. Ilara Vance's story is a powerful reminder that the world often mistakes quietness for weakness and silence for defeat. She proved that integrity is a currency more valuable than any stock, and that kindness can yield dividends beyond any billionaire's wildest dreams. Her journey from a silent courtroom to the head of a global empire wasn't about the money. It was about reclaiming a voice she was told wasn't worth hearing. It shows us that sometimes the most strategic move is to let your enemies defeat themselves while you wait patiently for the life you truly deserve. What did you think of Ilara's calculated silence? Was it the ultimate power move or an incredible risk? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story of poetic justice and quiet strength as compelling as I did, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more incredible true life stories. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for listening.
Mistress pushes pregnant wife down the stairs. Millionaire husband ignores her miscarriage. A pregnant heiress, a ruthless mistress, and a millionaire husband whose indifference chills the blood. This is the tangled web of secrets about to unravel. Adriana Harrington is moments away from motherhood when a devastating act of betrayal strikes at the heart of her once perfect life. With wealth and prestige coating the family's every move, no one expects the violence simmering beneath high society's polished veneer. But in a sweeping turn of events, the darkest of human emotions will come to light. Brace yourself for a tale of ambition, jealousy, and desperation that explodes into a tragedy so stunning it could shatter everything you thought you knew. Adriana Harrington awoke to the soft patter of rain against the glass walls of her grand bedroom. Her fingers unconsciously brushed across her rounded belly 6 months along, and each day brought new flutters of life within her. Wealth and privilege surrounded her in every corner of the Harrington estate, a sprawling mansion perched on the outskirts of Greenwich, Connecticut. She had married Nathan Harrington 2 years ago, entering a world where comfort was second nature and money answered every dilemma. Yet, this morning, an unexplainable unease lingered in her heart, disrupting what should have been a sense of security. The corridors seemed oddly silent. Usually, the staff bustled at the break of dawn, preparing breakfasts fit for royalty, dusting every surface, and polishing the marble floors. But today, Adriana found the hush unnerving. She slid on a silk robe and stepped onto the landing that overlooked the ornate foyer. Downstairs, she spotted her husband, Nathan, in deep conversation with someone she couldn't identify. The tone was hushed and the body language tense. Adriana descended the winding staircase, her hand gliding along the carved banister. Her father, the late Charles Greenwood, had always told her that intuition was a powerful guide. She recalled his words as she approached Nathan, trying to quell the rising anxiety in her chest. A heavy hush fell over the foyer as her foot touched the last step. Nathan turned, his handsome features drawn, shadows marking his eyes like secrets. Next to him stood a woman with raven black hair, sharp cheekbones, and a confident stance that spoke volumes about her place in Nathan's life. Adriana smiled politely, though something about the woman set off alarm bells in her mind. She had no idea how profoundly this stranger would unravel her world. Her name was Vanessa Bloom, a name Adriana would soon come to dread. Nathan introduced her with a casual ease that stirred jealousy in Adriana's heart. According to him, Vanessa was a financial consultant, brought in to help restructure some of Harrington Industries' faltering departments. But the way Vanessa placed a hand on Nathan's arm, letting her fingertips linger, struck Adriana like an arrow of suspicion. Adriana tried not to overreact. After all, her hormones were running wild, and jealousy was not a trait she liked to admit. She nodded politely, forced a smile, and left them to their conversation, excusing herself for a doctor's appointment scheduled later that morning. As she walked away, Adriana glanced over her shoulder. Nathan leaned in closer to Vanessa, whispering something that made the woman's crimson lips curl into a smile. An uneasy feeling followed Adriana into her car, where her personal driver, Joseph, waited. She couldn't shake the odd tension in her husband's demeanor or the glint of satisfaction in Vanessa's eyes. It seemed like everyone in the house was caught under an unexplained hush, like they knew something she didn't. At Dr. Megan Ross's office, Adriana attempted to refocus on the joy of her pregnancy. During the ultrasound, she heard the rhythmic thump of her baby's heartbeat, a reassuring sound that momentarily dissolved her worries. She wanted to share this moment with Nathan, but he hadn't offered to come. Lately, he seemed distant, absorbed in business calls and late-night meetings. As Adriana left the clinic, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, an unknown number. Answering, she heard a raspy female voice. "Whisper, watch your back." Before she could respond, the call ended. Chills shot through her body. She sensed that the fragile peace in her life was on the verge of shattering completely. Returning home felt like stepping into a different reality. The sunlight filtering through the tall windows did nothing to lift the gloom that clung to every surface of the Harrington mansion. Adriana found a neat envelope waiting for her on the foyer's marble-topped console. Inside was a note written in an elegant, looping script. "Be careful, some secrets can kill." A spike of alarm shot through her. Was this a joke? A threat? Unable to confront Nathan about it, directly he had been so distant lately, she tucked the note into her purse, determined to keep a watchful eye on everything around her. That evening, she dined alone at a massive walnut table in the formal dining room. Nathan had sent a text that he would be working late with Vanessa. Adriana picked at her meal, feeling both worry and anger swirl within her. She replayed her father's old advice, never make assumptions without fact. But all she saw were red flags. Seeking comfort, she decided to check on the family library, a place where she often found solace. Rows upon rows of leather-bound tomes offered an escape. But as she stepped inside, a figure by the tall window startled her. It was Lucy Harrington, Nathan's mother, a stern woman who seldom offered a friendly smile. Lucy regarded Adriana with a look of cool disinterest. "Does my son know you're up and about at this hour?" Lucy's voice was as cold as her demeanor. Adriana tried to suppress the shiver that crawled up her spine. She explained she was just looking for something to read, but Lucy's gaze flickered with an unspoken question, almost as if she suspected Adriana of prying. The tension in Lucy's stare did nothing to calm Adriana's nerves. Quietly, Adriana wondered if Lucy had any idea about the new woman in Nathan's life, or if she had even orchestrated it. Lucy Harrington's formidable presence in the household was well known. She was protective of her son, fiercely loyal to the Harrington legacy. Yet, she was never warm with Adriana. Since the wedding, Lucy had voiced subtle disapproval, citing how Adriana came from old money that had nearly gone bankrupt after her father's death. Lucy feared Adriana was more of a burden than an asset, a woman who might dilute the Harrington fortune rather than enhance it. That night in the library, Lucy's narrow eyes pinned Adriana in place. "Your pregnancy is bringing a new heir into the family. It's not something to be taken lightly," Lucy said, her voice tinged with an almost threatening undertone. Adriana swallowed, feeling the weight of Lucy's expectations. Could Lucy somehow be part of the tension swirling around her marriage? The older woman's protective nature might fuel dangerous decisions, especially if she perceived Adriana as unfit or inconvenient. In the days that followed, Lucy made sporadic appearances, always observing Adriana with silent judgment. Meanwhile, Vanessa Bloom's presence in Nathan's life became increasingly obvious. Instead of discussing financial reports in the office, Vanessa visited the estate, sometimes late into the evening. Whenever Adriana tried to corner Nathan for a conversation about it, he waved off her concerns. "You're imagining things," he said one night, dismissing the look of despair on Adriana's face. "Vanessa is a consultant. She's helping me fix some dire situations in the company." But Adriana couldn't ignore how Vanessa looked at Nathan, how she casually invaded their private spaces, leaving her perfume lingering in the foyer or a scarf thrown over the back of a chair in the living room. It felt invasive, like she was carving out her territory, making herself at home. In these mounting moments, seeds of distrust flourished, painting Adriana's once peaceful world in sinister shades of doubt. The final straw came on a stormy afternoon when Adriana, feeling uneasy at home, decided to pay a surprise visit to Harrington Industries. She wanted to see Nathan in his corporate domain, perhaps bring him lunch, and attempt to rekindle a spark of affection. With the help of her childhood friend, Serena Parker, she arranged a quiet entrance into the building, hoping to avoid turning heads. While waiting by the executive elevators, Adriana noticed Vanessa stepping out of Nathan's office. The way Vanessa adjusted her outfit, smoothing out wrinkles with a smug little smile, made Adriana's stomach churn, heart pounding. Adriana approached. "Vanessa," she began, voice trembling with a fury she struggled to contain. "I need to speak with you." Vanessa's eyes flared with surprise before sliding into an icy glare. "Mrs. Harrington, how can I help?" she asked, in a tone dripping with false politeness. Adriana steeled herself. "I see how you behave around my husband. Whatever your intentions are, I suggest you stop before you embarrass yourself or—" Vanessa's laugh was low and mocking. "Embarrass myself? You really have no idea who you're dealing with, do you?" Before Adriana could respond, Nathan emerged from his office. He glanced between the two women, clearly alarmed at the confrontation. Adriana could barely speak for fear of what she might say or do. Nathan took Vanessa's side immediately, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Adriana, stop this," he snapped, anger flashing in his eyes. "Vanessa is here for work. You're out of line." To stand there, pregnant and vulnerable, watching her husband choose this woman's side over hers, shattered something inside Adriana. She turned on her heel and walked away, tears burning her eyes. In that moment, betrayal sank its claws into her heart, and she vowed to protect herself and her unborn child, no matter the cost. Days passed in a haze of tension. Adriana avoided Nathan as much as possible. Their once lively bedroom was now a silent battleground. She found solace talking to her brother, Mark Greenwood, who had come to visit from Chicago. Mark noticed the shift in Adriana's demeanor immediately. Over coffee in the sunroom, she poured out her suspicions, Nathan's increasing coldness, Vanessa's bold intrusion, and the strange, threatening messages. Mark's brow furrowed. "You need to be careful, Adriana. You're carrying his heir, and that might put a target on your back." She nodded, thankful to have at least one person who believed her. That same evening, Adriana settled into her room early, desperate for rest. She found a note slipped under her door. This time, it was a typed message. "You won't stand in my way forever. One misstep, and everything you have will crumble." Heart pounding, she tucked the note in her nightstand. Sleep was elusive. Around midnight, she rose to get a glass of water from the kitchen. The mansion was dark, lit only by faint security lights. As she carefully descended the spiral staircase, a soft sound footsteps echoed behind her. A sudden push between her shoulder blades sent her tumbling forward. Time slowed. Adriana's scream tore through the stillness as her body pitched down the stairs. She landed in a heap at the bottom, a sharp pain radiating through her abdomen, her vision blurred, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Footsteps rushed away, disappearing into the shadows. She tried to call out for help, but her voice was choked by anguish and fear. Her fingers trembled as she cradled her belly, desperate to sense movement from the baby. Terror seized her heart. In that moment, Adriana knew this wasn't an accident. Someone wanted her, and possibly her child, gone. When Adriana regained consciousness, she found herself in a hospital bed. The antiseptic smell, the beeping machines, and the hushed voices of nurses filled the white-walled room. Her world felt suspended in a fog of pain and heartbreak. Mark sat beside her, his eyes rimmed red, a silent testament to the tragedy that had unfolded. "What happened?" Adriana asked weakly, though she already knew. Her hand instinctively went to her belly. It felt different, empty somehow. A wave of dread crashed over her. Mark swallowed hard. There was an accident," he murmured, tears glistening. "The doctors, they couldn't save your baby." The words struck like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Adriana let out a guttural sob, arms folded across her abdomen, as if to hold on to what was no longer there. The agony was almost unbearable. Memories of the unborn child, the tiny heartbeat she had cherished, flooded her mind. She felt as though she were dying inside. Then, unbidden, came the burning question, who pushed her? She was sure it wasn't just a misstep. Someone had pushed her down those stairs. Despite her grief, anger and resolve replaced her tears. She looked around for Nathan, expecting him to be at her side, overwhelmed with remorse. But he was absent, adding a fresh edge to her heartbreak. Mark explained that Nathan had been there briefly but left after the doctor delivered the devastating news. Adriana clenched her fists. The emptiness in her womb and the hollowness in her heart became an intolerable ache. She vowed to find out who had stolen her child's life and to make them pay. Her world was shattered, but a fierce determination kindled like an ember amid the wreckage, promising that she would not stop until the truth was laid bare. Adriana spent 2 days in the hospital, undergoing tests and healing from the bruises and internal trauma. Yet the emotional wound was the most gaping. The doctors recommended counseling to handle the loss of her baby, but she felt no desire to open up to a stranger when her own husband seemed so cold and distant. Nathan visited on the second evening, a mere half-hour cameo. He stood by the door, arms folded, posture stiff. He offered rote sympathy, never once meeting her eyes with genuine remorse. Instead, he focused on the unfortunate accident and how it might affect the family's reputation. Adriana was appalled. "Our reputation? What about our child?" she demanded, her voice cracking under the weight of fresh grief. "We lost our baby, Nathan." Nathan's gaze flickered away. "I know this is difficult, Adriana, but we can try again. You're young." His words lacked warmth, almost as if he'd rehearsed them. She stared at him, shock and heartbreak intertwining. Could this be the same man she once adored? The weight of betrayal pressed on her chest. Someone had pushed her, stolen their child's life, and he was acting as if it were a trivial setback. Before leaving, Nathan dropped a final blow. "Mother has arranged for a caretaker to look after you at home. Focus on recovering. I need to handle business matters. Vanessa has stepped in to manage some urgent tasks, so I'll be busy." The mention of Vanessa drove a sharpened spike of pain into Adriana's heart. It was as if the mistress had become more important than a grieving wife. Once he left, Adriana let out a trembling breath. Reality was stark. She had lost her baby, and the one person who should grieve alongside her seemed utterly indifferent. Slowly she closed her eyes, and a single thought reverberated through her mind: find the truth, no matter what it takes. Upon her return to the Harrington estate, Adriana found the air thick with tension. Lucy Harrington hovered in the foyer, eyes skimming over Adriana's bandaged arm and bruised face with a fleeting hint of pity. Yet Lucy said nothing about the baby, offering no condolences for the grandchild she had lost. Instead, she ushered Adriana up to her bedroom and reiterated the doctor's orders to rest. Confined to her room, Adriana's isolation was punctuated by visits from a private nurse. Lucy had hired. The nurse was polite but distant. Although Adriana appreciated her care, she felt caged in a place that had once been her home. After a week, Adriana discovered a stroke of luck. The household staff seemed to sympathize with her plight. Late one night, a maid named Rosalie slipped into Adriana's room to deliver dinner and quietly confided that the staff whispered about the push on the stairs. Some believed it was an intruder. Others were certain someone within the mansion was responsible. But mention of a confrontation between Adriana and Vanessa had fueled intense speculation. Miss S. Harrington, Rosalie said softly, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting eavesdroppers. I didn't see anything myself, but I heard from the butler that Miss Bloom was seen coming down the servants' stairs around the same time you fell. Adriana's pulse quickened. She pressed Rosalie for details, but the maid had none to offer. Still, the implication was enough to ignite Adriana's suspicions like wildfire. Vanessa had been in the house that night, lurking around in restricted corridors. In a mansion brimming with secrets, Adriana realized that loyalty was a currency more valuable than gold. The staff's silent support could be her key to finding the truth and exposing the darkness festering at the heart of the Harrington family. Determined to uncover who had pushed her, Adriana requested a meeting with Detective Lisa Parker, a local officer who had once handled minor security matters for the wealthy families in Greenwich. Lucy balked at the idea, insisting that the fall was an accident, but Adriana was not swayed. She needed answers, and she refused to be silenced. Detective Parker arrived quietly one afternoon, dressed in plain clothes so as not to arouse suspicion. Over tea in Adriana's private sitting room, she listened attentively, taking down notes as Adriana recounted every detail she remembered her nightly trip to the kitchen. The sudden shove, the sound of hurried footsteps fleeing the scene. "Is there anyone you suspect?" Parker asked delicately. Adriana hesitated. She was uncertain if Lucy was complicit or if the blame lay solely on Vanessa. Perhaps it was even someone else, altogether, someone protecting the family's fortune. "I believe it could be Vanessa Bloom," she finally admitted, voice trembling. "She's my husband's friend, and she was seen wandering around that night." Detective Parker nodded, though her face gave little away. She promised to do her best to investigate discreetly. Despite her vow, Adriana sensed the odds were stacked against any thorough inquiry. The Harrington name carried immense influence in local circles. Money and power often muffled any scandal. As Detective Parker left, Adriana gazed out the window at the sweeping lawns of the estate. She remembered her father's wise counsel when faced with a locked door. Look for a window. She might have to open every window in the Harrington world to uncover the truth. Unbeknownst to Adriana, Lucy and Nathan were watching from a distance, their expressions grim. To them, Adriana's insistence on calling the police threatened the family's reputation. And to Vanessa, it spelled war. The estate felt suffocating. So Adriana sought refuge at a nearby cafe in Greenwich, one that her father used to frequent. She invited her brother, Mark, and her friend, Serena Parker, to meet her there. Both arrived promptly, concern etched on their faces. They listened intently as Adriana detailed her meeting with Detective Lisa Parker. "I'm worried that the detective can only do so much," she confessed, voice quavering. "Nathan's influence reaches far, and he doesn't seem the least bit interested in helping me find out who pushed me." Serena tapped her manicured nails on the table, her eyes narrowing. "I can hire a private investigator. My boss's husband, George Walters, runs a reputable firm in New York. They're discreet and thorough. If anyone can dig into Vanessa's background, it's them." Hope fluttered in Adriana's chest. She squeezed Serena's hand. "That might be exactly what I need." Mark leaned forward, his tone grave. We need concrete proof, Adriana. A push down the stairs could be an attempted murder charge. Whoever did this took your child's life. This isn't just about money or secrets anymore. This is about justice for your baby. A lump formed in Adriana's throat, but she nodded. Fury simmered beneath her sorrow. Whatever it takes, she whispered. Over the next few days, Serena made arrangements for George Walters to begin a quiet investigation. Meanwhile, Mark promised to stay in Greenwich for as long as Adriana needed him. Their unwavering support offered Adriana a glimmer of stability in a world that felt like it was collapsing. Reinvigorated by the alliance forming around her, Adriana steeled herself for what was to come. It was time to lift the veil on every lie, every secret hidden within the Harrington name, no matter the cost. While the private investigation got underway, Adriana continued to endure the tense atmosphere at home. Lucy's disapproving glares, Vanessa's smug appearances, and Nathan's frigid indifference formed a silent trio of hostility that seemed to grow stronger by the day. Late one night, Adriana found herself restless again. She tiptoed through the mansion's dark corridors, drawn by the flicker of light streaming from under Lucy's study door. Pressing her ear against the polished wood, she could hear raised voices, Lucy and Nathan, apparently locked in an argument. "She's making a spectacle of this," Lucy hissed. "Can't you control your wife?" The detective's presence has everyone talking. Nathan's reply came in a quiet, angry tone. "I've tried, Mother. She's determined. But we can't have our name dragged through a murder investigation." A shiver shot down Adriana's spine. So they did fear the possibility of a murder investigation. She inched away from the door, not wanting to hear more, but unable to stop listening. Lucy continued, voice trembling with rage. "And what about Vanessa? Her reputation is at stake too, Nathan. She's been good for you, for the company. Your father would never stand for this family being torn apart by scandal." Adriana stifled a gasp. The words were a stark admission of Lucy's preference for Vanessa's well-being over Adriana's heartbreak. It was horrifying to confirm the suspicion that Lucy supported her son's affair, or at least tolerated it for business reasons. Steadying herself, Adriana crept back to her room. As her heart thudded, she couldn't shake the feeling that Lucy, Nathan, and Vanessa were all entangled in something far darker than just an affair. Their conversation suggested they knew more than they let on, and perhaps Lucy was even orchestrating ways to protect her precious family legacy, regardless of the cost to Adriana's life. The next afternoon, Serena delivered surprising news from the private investigator, George Walters. He had dug up information about Vanessa Bloom's past that painted a far different picture than the polished financial consultant facade she presented. Over a secure phone call, George relayed the findings. Vanessa Bloom isn't her real name. She was born Vanessa Torre in a small town in upstate New York. She changed her name after she married. He paused, flipping through notes. A wealthy businessman named Vincent Bloom. Their marriage ended under suspicious circumstances when he died in a boating accident. Vanessa inherited a hefty sum, fueling her subsequent entry into high-end business consulting. Adriana's blood ran cold. "Suspicious circumstances?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. George sighed. The official report was an accident, but local rumors suggested foul play. The case was never reopened, though. With money and connections, Vanessa seems to have navigated those waters unscathed. Adriana exchanged worried glances with Serena and Mark. Was Vanessa capable of murder? Could she truly have orchestrated the push that caused Adriana's miscarriage? The possibility that Vanessa had a history of targeting wealthy men, removing obstacles, and walking away with fortunes was terrifying. "What do we do with this?" Adriana asked, her voice trembling. "We gather more evidence," George replied firmly. "We need proof that ties her to your fall. but this background suggests a motive, especially if she sees you as standing in her path to a share of Nathan's fortune. Adriana's thoughts whirled. Vanessa might not just be a mistress with an eye on a wealthy man, she could be a killer. Adriana's resolve hardened further. She silently thanked her father's legacy of caution and cunning, traits she now realized were essential in the face of such insidious danger. She would not be silenced. Not this time, not ever again. As if sensing the walls closing in, Lucy Harrington suddenly made a show of kindness toward Adriana. She insisted on hosting a grand dinner at the estate, inviting a select group of high-profile guests, including some prominent local politicians and business moguls. Lucy claimed it was to help Adriana reintroduce herself to society after her tragic loss. But Adriana suspected it was more about smoke and mirrors, an attempt to bury the scandal under a facade of normalcy. Despite her grief, Adriana dressed in a simple black gown, the color reflecting her somber mood. She circulated among the guests, her smile forced, her heart far away. As the evening wore on, she noticed Lucy pulling Vanessa aside in a corner of the room, whispering with an air of conspiracy. Mark, ever vigilant, approached Adriana with a drink. "They're cooking something up," he said grimly. "I can see it in their eyes." Adriana nodded, lips pressed thin. She excused herself and slipped closer to eavesdrop on Lucy and Vanessa's hushed exchange. Although the crowd's chatter drowned out most words, she caught fragments of public perception, keep her quiet, and the will. Her heart pounded. The Harrington estate, the fortune, and Nathan's inheritance were apparently at the center of this scheme. As Lucy turned away, the glint in her eyes suggested a depth of manipulation that chilled Adriana. At dinner, Lucy raised a toast to family unity and healing, but the sentiment rang hollow. Nathan, seated next to Vanessa, lifted his glass with mechanical politeness. The tension at the table was palpable. Adriana locked eyes with Vanessa, and an unsettling smile curved across the mistress's lips. It was a silent dare, an unspoken challenge. Adriana felt her anger burn, forging her determination to protect what was left of her life and seek justice for the child she lost. Days after the dinner, the mansion felt more stifling than ever. Adriana's grief and rage grew with each passing hour. She had reached the point where the only way to survive was to confront Nathan directly, to demand answers he'd so far avoided giving. She found him in his office, dictating something into a recorder, legal documents spread across his polished mahogany desk. With a trembling voice, she stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Nathan, we need to talk," she began, her tone steady despite the storm in her chest. He paused, removing his reading glasses. About what? His eyes held the same distant glaze she'd grown to despise. Adriana forced herself to remain calm. "Someone pushed me down those stairs," she said, each word measured. "And I lost our child. I can't believe you're not more interested in finding out who did it." Nathan exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You're imagining conspiracies, Adriana. The police ruled it as an accident." "They did not," she interrupted, frustration boiling over. "Detective Parker hasn't closed the case. I just spoke with her this morning. It was partly a lie she had spoken to the detective, but Parker said little about whether the case was still active. However, it was enough to rattle Nathan. His jaw clenched. "Look, I'm trying to protect this family from a scandal. Maybe you slipped. You were tired and grieving." It's not uncommon. The crack in Adriana's composure finally split wide open. "Stop treating me like a fragile liar," she snapped, tears of anger spilling over. "I know you're having an affair with Vanessa. I know there's more to her than meets the eye. If you won't help me uncover the truth, then you're part of the problem." Nathan's face hardened, his silence a confirmation of her worst fears. Adriana turned away, her heart pounding. She couldn't rely on him anymore. This was war, and she would fight it alone if she had to. Armed with George Walters's preliminary findings on Vanessa, Adriana resumed her discussions with Detective Parker. She handed over the documents detailing Vanessa's past, explaining the suspicious circumstances surrounding her former husband's death. Detective Parker's eyes narrowed as she read through the files. "This certainly paints Miss Bloom in a troubling light," Parker acknowledged. "But I need concrete evidence linking her to your fall." Adriana nodded, her expression resolute. "I understand. Just promise me you'll keep digging." Once the detective departed, Adriana paced the length of her room, frustration gnawing at her. She wanted immediate justice, but the legal process was slow and methodical, especially where the Harrington name was concerned. Her phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number displayed on the screen. She answered hesitantly, bracing for another threat. Instead, a low, male voice spoke. "Miss S. Harrington? It's Dr. Anthony Wexler, a colleague of Dr. Megan Ross. I need to speak with you regarding your medical files." Surprise flashed through Adriana. "What's this about?" The call was brief but left Adriana with a new thread to pull. Dr. Wexler had discovered an inconsistency in her hospital records, something about how her injuries had been documented. He insisted on meeting in person, away from the prying eyes of the Harrington estate. Later that evening, Adriana slipped out with Mark and Serena at her side. They met Dr. Wexler at a small clinic on the outskirts of town. There, he revealed that the severity of Adriana's injuries suggested a deliberate act of violence rather than a mere slip. He also hinted that someone had tried to alter or hide parts of her medical documentation, presumably to downplay the possibility of assault. The revelation hit Adriana like a jolt of electricity. Someone was actively covering up the crime. Now more than ever, Adriana knew she was on the right path. She just hoped she could survive it. Amid the chaos, a letter arrived from the Harrington family attorney. It stated that the old Harrington Trust Fund, a massive portion of the estate's wealth, was set to be restructured. The letter invited Adriana to meet at the law firm's office the following week. Curiously, the letter mentioned that Nathan intended to modify his will, citing recent family developments. Alarm bells rang in Adriana's mind. If Nathan was changing his will right after she lost their child, it could only mean one thing: the Harrington family was protecting their assets from her. The sudden push to rearrange the inheritance could even suggest that Lucy and Nathan believed Adriana might not remain in the picture for long. Fueled by dread, Adriana discussed the matter with Mark. He frowned, tapping the letter. "They might be trying to cut you out of any inheritance, especially now that there's no baby involved." The possibility sent a chill through Adriana. She recalled the conversation she'd overheard between Lucy and Vanessa about the will. This was the final piece of the puzzle, linking the push on the stairs to a financial motive. If Vanessa became Nathan's new wife, or Lucy's favored partner for him, she could inherit part of the Harrington empire. Adriana, in their eyes, was an inconvenience. Anger burned through her grief. "I won't let them do this," she declared fiercely. "My father taught me to fight for what's rightfully mine. They may have cost me my child, but they won't steal my future." In the days leading up to the meeting at the law firm, Adriana prepared herself. She consulted her own lawyer, arranged for George Walters to keep a close watch on Vanessa, and prayed that the detective would find enough evidence to bring the truth to light before the Harringtons executed their final, ruthless plan. Adriana's heart drummed a furious beat against her ribs as she stepped into the sleek, glass-walled lobby of Davis and Hemsworth, the Harrington family's long-standing law firm. High above her, steel rafters crisscrossed the ceiling, giving the space a cathedral-like hush. She clutched the folder containing George Walters's investigative findings close to her chest, steeling herself for the confrontation that lay ahead. A junior associate guided her through a maze of corridors into a spacious conference room. The plush carpeting muted her footsteps, and the faint scent of polished wood and expensive cologne hung in the air. She spotted Nathan seated at one end of a long mahogany table, with Lucy perched at his right side. Their postures were equally rigid, as though they had rehearsed how to maintain composure. A tall stack of legal documents waited before them, overseen by Franklin Dyson, the family's formidable attorney. Across from them sat Marjorie Carter, Adriana's own legal counsel. Marjorie was a seasoned attorney known for her calm tenacity in the face of intimidation. She offered a slight nod of encouragement as Adriana took her seat. "Welcome," Franklin Dyson said in a measured tone. He wore a crisp navy suit, and his eyes flicked from Adriana's face to the documents she hugged protectively. "We're here to discuss the trust, restructuring, and Mr. Harrington's revised will. Let's begin." Nathan cleared his throat. "Yes, I intend to allocate certain assets differently," he began, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. His gaze flickered toward his mother, who offered him a terse nod. "In light of recent events," he continued, "we believe it's prudent to ensure that Harrington Industries and our family holdings remain on stable footing." Adriana fought to keep her temper in check. A swirl of anger, grief, and betrayal surged within her. Is that how they were framing this? An act of prudence? She could almost see the calculations running through Lucy's mind, how to protect the family name, how to keep Adriana from any real power or wealth. The memory of her fall and the precious life she had lost simmered just beneath her composure. As the discussion moved into legal jargon, Lucy cut in with the precision of a hawk. "We all know the situation has been difficult, but we must do what's necessary to maintain the Harrington legacy. This restructuring is not meant to harm anyone. It's simply what is best for the estate." Marjorie leaned forward, her voice cool. "Miss S. Harrington Adriana deserves to know the specifics of these changes. She's been a part of this family, and until recently, she was carrying its heir. Revisions to the will under such circumstances merit thorough explanation." Lucy's expression hardened. Circumstances change. We can't dwell on tragedies forever. Something in Adriana snapped at those words. The mention of her miscarriage, brushed aside as a mere tragedy, made her press her fingernails into her palms until it hurt. She drew a slow, steadying breath before speaking. "I appreciate we're all here to discuss financial matters, but I won't ignore what happened to me and to my child." A flicker of annoyance crossed Franklin Dyson's face. "Miss S. Harrington," he said carefully, "we sympathize with your loss. However, these proceedings are strictly about estate management." "Perhaps we should focus." "No," Adriana interrupted, her voice low and resolute. She placed the folder on the table and slid it towards Dyson. "This is about far more than money. There is a criminal investigation into my fall, and I have reason to believe it wasn't an accident. Inside that folder is evidence of Miss Vanessa Bloom's disturbing past and details pointing to a deliberate attempt to harm me." A heavy silence descended over the room. Lucy's spine went rigid, and Nathan paled, his carefully practiced facade cracking at the edges. Dyson hesitated, then reached for the folder, flipping through its contents with a growing frown. Adriana continued, her voice gaining strength. "I want it documented here, in front of my attorney and yours, that I suspect someone in this family, or associated with it, orchestrated that push. If anything else happens to me, I want my concerns on record. I won't be silenced." Lucy tried to mask her discomfort with a brittle laugh. "You're paranoid, Adriana. This is outrageous." Marjorie calmly cut her off. "We won't engage in name-calling, Mrs. Harrington. My client is exercising her right to protect herself. Given the gravity of her suspicions, it's entirely appropriate to raise them now, especially as you move to alter financial arrangements that could disadvantage her. Nathan opened his mouth, but no words came out. His gaze kept drifting to the folder. Page after page, Dyson's eyes widened, particularly at the portions about Vanessa's previous marriage and the suspicious circumstances of her husband's death. Lucy made a show of rolling her shoulders back. This is a smear campaign. Vanessa is a consummate professional. She's done valuable work for Harrington Industries, professional or not, Adriana interjected. She's got secrets, and I believe her secrets have cost me my child. Another tense stillness filled the space. Each breath Adriana drew felt heavy with the weight of all she had endured and all she now risked by confronting the Harringtons in their own stronghold. Dyson cleared his throat, placing the folder down carefully. "These allegations are serious," he admitted, his usual crisp tone betraying a hint of unease. "If there's an active police investigation, we may need to pause any drastic changes to the will until the matter is resolved." Nathan's face fell. He seemed torn, glancing at Lucy for reassurance, but Lucy offered none, only a severe, icy glare. At last, he dragged his gaze to Adriana. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I never wanted it to go this far," he said, though his words held no comfort. Adriana found no solace in his lukewarm confession. She rose to her feet, meeting Lucy's stare head-on. "I won't allow you to bully me out of my rights or bury the truth about what happened. My child deserves justice, and I won't rest until I get it." With that, she turned on her heel and strode from the conference room, Marjorie close behind. Her heart hammered, but a fierce sense of validation swelled within her. She had done it, spoken her truth in the lion's den. Behind her, she could almost hear the cracks forming in the Harringtons' carefully constructed fortress of power, each tiny fracture inching them closer to a day of reckoning. In the corridor, she exchanged a look of grim satisfaction with Marjorie. Though the battle was far from over, Adriana felt a surge of renewed purpose. Fear still lingered in her veins, but so did a quiet exhilaration. She was no longer alone, and now the Harringtons knew she would not go quietly into the shadows. That single act of courage would reshape the entire game, and as Adriana walked away, she sensed the tide beginning to turn in her favor, each step resonating with a small but vital victory. That very evening, chaos erupted at the Harrington estate. Word spread quickly that Adriana had gone public, at least in a legal context, with her suspicions. Under George Walters's guidance, she'd also provided statements to Detective Parker. The local press, always eager for high society scandals, caught wind of brewing conflict within the Harrington empire. Nathan confronted Adriana in their once shared bedroom, eyes ablaze with a mixture of rage and desperation. "You've humiliated me," he seethed, slamming the door behind him. "My name is in every gossip column, and the board is questioning my judgment." Adriana faced him calmly. "You humiliated yourself by bringing Vanessa into our marriage," she said, voice steady despite her trembling hands. "By ignoring our child's death and covering up a crime. I won't be silent anymore." He advanced, fists clenched, but then stopped, as if seeing her in a new light. "I never wanted this," he muttered, his anger seemingly deflated by a flicker of guilt. "You don't understand what Mother expects of me, what the Harrington name demands." In another corner of the mansion, Lucy raged at the household staff, threatening to fire anyone who dared speak to the press. She made frantic phone calls, possibly to political connections, trying to quash the whispers of an attempted murder. Yet the story had already seeped through the gilded walls. As the tension mounted, Adriana felt both terrified and resolute. She refused to be a victim any longer. She had proof of Vanessa's suspicious past, the tampered medical records, and enough reason to believe Lucy's manipulations were part of a bigger plot. If justice was to be served, it might tear the Harrington family apart. In the darkest recesses of Adriana's heart, She wondered if Nathan had any capacity left to redeem himself, or if he was too deeply ensnared in Lucy's control to ever stand by her side again. A few weeks later, a storm of legal battles and sensational headlines descended on the Harrington family like a relentless hurricane. Under pressure from the authorities and facing a swirl of public scrutiny, Nathan was forced to acknowledge that Vanessa Bloom had a more extensive role in his life than he initially admitted. In hushed confessions behind closed doors, Nathan finally revealed to Detective Parker that Vanessa had threatened him, using blackmail over certain fraudulent business dealings within Harrington Industries. This revelation shifted suspicion onto Vanessa, culminating in a formal investigation. Detective Parker and her team gathered statements from staff members and leveraged George Walters's findings, unearthing enough evidence to arrest Vanessa on charges of conspiracy and possible attempted murder. Though the case was still ongoing, Vanessa's arrest brought a semblance of resolution to the mansion's dark chapter. Lucy retreated from public life, her reputation tarnished by suggestions that she had encouraged or at least tolerated the affair to secure business alliances. She cut a reclusive figure in the estate's east wing, consumed by the knowledge that her thirst for power had contributed to a tragedy that claimed her grandchild's life. As for Nathan, the scandal forced him to confront his moral failings. In a rare moment of humility, he approached Adriana with tears in his eyes, apologizing for his indifference, his betrayal, and for failing to protect her or their unborn child. She listened, her emotions tangled between lingering anger, deep sorrow, and a flicker of pity for the man she once loved. Yet Adriana had come too far to simply fall back under his sway. She decided to file for divorce, determined to forge a new life free from Harrington manipulations. In reclaiming her freedom, she honored the memory of the child she lost and found the courage to live for herself. 6 months later, Adriana stood outside the Greenwich courthouse, a final decree in her hands. The divorce was granted. The once mighty Harrington empire had been rocked by scandal, with ongoing legal cases against both Vanessa and key associates who aided in covering up her alleged crimes. Though Nathan avoided jail time, he was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered reputation and a fragile business. Adriana reflected on her journey, a tale of heartbreak, betrayal, and resolve. She had lost her child, confronted a mistress bent on seizing fortune, and faced a powerful family that sought to silence her at every turn. In the end, she emerged with her dignity and a renewed sense of self-worth. She chose to channel her pain into a new purpose, establishing a charity in her child's memory aimed at supporting vulnerable pregnant women. Mark remained her unwavering pillar of support, while Serena Parker continued working alongside the private investigator, ensuring justice would be served against Vanessa. Detective Parker, having proven her integrity, rose in rank and became a respected figure in local law enforcement circles. On a brisk morning, Adriana took a deep breath of the cold air and walked toward her car. The future was uncharted territory, but she felt hopeful. She would always carry the memory of her lost child, but she also carried an indomitable spirit forged by heartbreak and tempered by determination. A phone buzz interrupted her thoughts. It was Serena, reminding her about a meeting for the new charity. Adriana smiled, the warmth in her heart something she hadn't felt for a long time. With each step forward, she chose life, and in doing so, honored the precious love she had nurtured, albeit briefly, within her. Thank you for journeying through this tumultuous tale of ambition, betrayal, and a mother's courage in the face of unimaginable loss. Adriana Harrington's fight for justice reminds us that even in the darkest moments, resilience can lead to redemption, and that no amount of wealth can overshadow the power of truth. We hope you've been captivated by each twist and turn in this real-life drama fiction. If you found yourself moved by Adriana's perseverance, stunned by the layers of deception, or inspired by the possibility of new beginnings, we invite you to share this video. Let's keep the conversation going about the importance of standing up against betrayal and refusing to be silenced. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more gripping narratives that shine a light on the strength of the human spirit.